Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm a little nervous because I'm recording this the day before a photo shoot that I've been dieting for the past 7 months, so about 28 weeks. I'm the leanest I've ever been at this body weight. I've been at this body weight before, but I wasn't as lean because I didn't have as much muscle. I will do a deep dive into the photo shoot prep that I did this year in a future episode. But that's not the main topic of today's podcast, so I'm not going to spend too much time discussing this. However, I just wanted to let you know that it's happening tomorrow. I am thrilled about it, but now I'm also a little bit nervous. I have done a photo shoot before. I did it last year for the very first time, so I'm not a newbie to it. But still, I'm a perfectionist, and it's a little nerve-wracking. In any case, the main topic of this podcast is going to be what you need to do every time you step into the gym or into the home gym in order to make every single workout as effective to build muscle as it can possibly be. First of all, muscle growth in humans happens as a result of a physiological process called hypertrophy or hypertrophy. I personally say hypertrophy, so I'll keep using this pronunciation for the rest of the podcast. Hypertrophy is an increase in the size of each individual muscle fiber or muscle cell within a muscle. There's also another process that results in muscle growth, and it's called hyperplasia, which is an increase in the number of muscle fibers or cells within a muscle, but that seems to happen primarily in animals, whereas in humans, we build muscle through the process of hypertrophy. In order to accomplish hypertrophy, you need a training program that's specifically designed for this goal. However, many people think that that's all it takes. As long as they have a program and they follow it, they're going to get results. Now, sure, lifting some weights is going to get you more gains than if you just sat on the couch. But if you want to truly maximize hypertrophy, then you also have an opportunity to do so every single time you step into the gym if you focus on these two key priorities: your exercise technique or form and your intensity of effort or how hard each set is. But before I discuss these in more depth, I want you to understand why they are important for hypertrophy. First of all, we need to touch upon how exactly hypertrophy happens at the muscle fiber level. Don't worry, I will not go all muscle growth nerd on you today. You don't need a PhD to understand what I'm about to say. I'm just going to cover the basics. First of all, be aware that while we're studying hypertrophy, there is a lot about it that we actually don't know yet, and that includes how it actually happens. We have some theories and some models that the scientific community tends to agree on at the moment, but we're not 100% confident in these models. What seems to be the main driver of the process of hypertrophy is called mechanical tension. What you want to achieve in your training sessions is to subject as many muscle fibers as you possibly can to enough mechanical tension to trigger the process of hypertrophy. So how do we do that? Your first priority in order to accomplish this goal is to master the technique or form of each exercise in your session. This isn't only because you want to avoid getting injured, although that's obviously really important. It's also because if you have the appropriate form, you're going to recruit the muscles that you actually intend to recruit for that lift. When you use inappropriate form, you're essentially simply doing your best to move the weight from A to B in any way it can possibly happen with whatever muscles you can recruit. So you tend to compensate with muscles that you might not want to train with that exercise just in order to get the lift. So by mastering your technique, you're going to ensure that when you're doing an exercise, you are training the muscle that you intend to train. Your second priority in your training sessions is to train hard enough. And when you define training hard enough in the context of hypertrophy, what you're talking about is your proximity to muscular or technical failure. Failure is the point past which either you can't complete a full repetition or rep, and that's called muscular failure. For example, let's say you're doing a bench press and you're pressing the dumbbells off of your chest and you're trying to straighten your arms fully. If you can't straighten your arms fully, you get halfway through and you have to put the weight down. That's a failed rep, so you've hit muscular failure. Technical failure, on the other hand, is the point past which you can't complete a full rep with proper technique. For example, let's say that you're doing a barbell bent over row, and in the beginning of the set, when you're not fatigued, you're fresh, all is well, you start the set and you have your torso almost parallel to the floor or only slightly less than parallel to the floor, and you're pulling the bar to touch your abdomen on every single rep. Now, as you get more and more fatigued, you're starting to rise up to a standing position, and then you might hit a repetition where you're essentially standing up straight. Now, that would be a failed repetition because at that point, your form isn't really appropriate to target your back muscles. At that point, you're kind of doing a cross between a deadlift and a barbell bent over row. So in this case, you would call the set because the exercise that you're doing looks completely different from when you started, and that's technical failure. In order to grow muscle, you need to train within a certain proximity to that failure point. Otherwise, your sets are going to be too easy to generate enough mechanical tension in as many muscle fibers as possible to trigger these muscle fibers to grow. Here's what happens instead when you train within the appropriate proximity to failure. First of all, by coming so close to generating the maximal amount of force that your muscles are capable of, you're clearly also generating a lot of mechanical tension, and your fibers are sensing a lot of mechanical tension. In addition, training closer to failure also enables you to recruit as many muscle fibers within a muscle as you possibly can. And I'll explain why. Each muscle fiber is connected to a neuron, and each neuron is linked to a number of fibers. These neurons send the fibers the order to activate and contribute to a movement, like a repetition. A neuron plus all of the fibers that it quote unquote supervises or innervates in technical terms is called a motor unit. Now, these motor units aren't activated all at once as soon as you start a set. So just because you do one rep doesn't mean that all of your fibers are activated and sensing mechanical tension. They are fired according to what's called Henneman's size principle, which states that motor units are activated from the smallest to the biggest. The biggest motor units are primarily made up of a type of fiber that's known as fast twitch fibers. These fast twitch fibers can produce the most amount of force. They produce more force than the other type that I'm going to introduce in a moment, but they also fatigue faster. And they are also the fibers that seem to grow the most with hypertrophy training. So getting to the point where you can recruit these motor units containing fast twitch fibers is very important for hypertrophy. Whereas the smaller motor units, which are activated first at the beginning of a set, contain primarily slow twitch fibers. And these tend to produce less force than fast twitch fibers, but they have more endurance, so they can keep producing force for longer. And now it should make sense to you why they are also activated first, because they can keep going for longer, whereas the body seems to save the motor units that produce more force but fatigue faster for the very end of the set, when they are most needed for that extra boost of force production, but they also won't last very long. The closer we get to muscular failure, the more motor units we are going to recruit, up to the point where we're also recruiting the bigger motor units which contain the fast twitch fibers. Therefore, proximity to failure is important not only to generate high amount of mechanical tension that a single fiber is going to sense, but also to recruit as many fibers as possible and expose all of these to enough mechanical tension. Based on the scientific literature that we have right now, it doesn't seem like you need to go all the way to failure in order to grow muscle. And I actually have an article delving into this topic in more depth, and it's titled, "Do You Need to Train to Failure to Grow Muscle?" And I'm going to add a link to it in the show notes. So you don't necessarily need to train to failure, and in fact, it seems like there might be some drawbacks when you train to failure all the time. It could be appropriate under certain circumstances, but it is not necessary to maximize muscle growth. What we do know is that it seems that we need to train within 3 to 0 repetitions from your failure point in order to grow muscle efficiently. So to recap, whenever a client starts working with me, and one of their goals is muscle growth, which is pretty much always, because as I said, I specialize in muscle growth and fat loss, then I make a point of educating them about how to make the most of the training program that I design for them. Because my training programs are all geared towards optimizing muscle growth. However, you need to channel your efforts into the right priorities for muscle growth when you're in the gym. And many people focus too much on lifting as heavy as possible, often with questionable form. Or they focus on doing as many reps as you possibly can, again with questionable form. Or they focus on getting a sweat on and resting 10 seconds between sets. And again, that usually leads to questionable form. Whereas what we're trying to accomplish here is achieving enough mechanical tension across the highest number of muscle fibers possible in order to trigger the process of muscle hypertrophy. So at the session level, what you need to do is first master your form, because that way you are going to make sure that you're recruiting the muscles that you actually want to train. Secondarily, once you've mastered form, you need to train within 3 to 0 repetitions from the point of muscular or technical failure, because the closer to failure you train, so if you stay within that 3 to 0 repetitions from failure range, the more mechanical tension each muscle fiber is going to sense, and the more fibers you're going to be able to recruit. And that's a wrap for today's podcast. Hopefully, now you have a pretty good understanding of what you need to do every time you step into the gym in order to trigger the process of hypertrophy and see those sweet muscular gains. My plan for future episodes is to cover effective exercise form and proximity to failure in more depth, as well as effective nutrition practices for muscle growth. And I want to have a special guest that I'm hoping to schedule soon on the podcast to discuss how to design an entire training program for hypertrophy. To finish off, I'm super excited to say that this was the first week of Transformation Kickstart, or at least I'm talking like it's already happened, because I know I'm going to release the podcast by the time the first week will be over. But as I said, I am recording the podcast the day before my photo shoot, which is actually the week before Transformation Kickstart begins. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. Transformation Kickstart will be in full swing by the time you're listening to this podcast, so signups are currently closed. However, you can still apply for one-on-one coaching, which adds a more personalized touch to a group coaching program like Transformation Kickstart. So you're going to find the link to that in the show notes, alongside the link to my website, to my Instagram account where you can follow me, and the link to sign up for my newsletter so that you can keep up with my content and get extra free advice that I don't share on social media. I only share that with my loyal subscribers. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.